Welcome to the first panel discussion of the Good Information Project by the Journal. I'm Naoise, and this is our panel of impressive and varied young people here to talk about the future of Northern Ireland, its place in the Union, what they think of a united Ireland, and also the recent news events that have dominated the headlines today and the front pages today. The talk will run for around an hour. And at the end, there'll be a Q&A session where you can ask your questions. You can submit them now through the chat function or during the talk. I'd like to introduce our panel because they are very impressive speakers. We have Jay Buntin, who is the director and co-founder of Pure Mental, which is an organization that focuses on education and youth mental health issues. Hi, Jay. We have Naoise Ó Cuilín, who is an Irish language activist, and he's studying an MA in International and Security Conflict Studies in DCU. Hello, Naoise.
How's it going?
We have Alana Cahoon, who's co-founder of the Secondary Students' Union of Northern Ireland and an ambassador for Together, Building a United Community. Hi, Alana. We have Hafsa Abdullahi Mohammed, who moved to Northern Ireland from the Somalian capital of Mogadishu. She's a young Muslim who lives in West Belfast and is in upper sixth form currently. Hi, Hafsa. We have Dermot Hamill, who is 17 from South Armagh and runs the Youth Voice Northern Ireland blog and podcast and hopes to get young people interested in politics. Hi, Dermot.
Hi.
So that's our panel, and we weren't going to lead with the violence in Northern Ireland at the start. We were going to talk about life in Northern Ireland more generally, but we've been overtaken by events basically. And, you know, some of the scenes we've seen are really shocking and kind of reminiscent of the past of Northern Ireland, which we've been told we really don't want to return back to. Petrol bombs and division between people again, police getting involved and injured, a bus driver who's left shaken after a bus has been burnt out. They're all quite shocking images. And Jay, I might ask you first, what was your reaction to that? Or what do you think is what's been happening in the past week in Belfast?
But it's very upsetting to see. It's a real blast to the past, almost in a very negative way. It's very concerning to see such young people getting involved, and you know, whether or not it's them that are passionate about the issues or if they've been encouraged, that's maybe not the point. But we think that perhaps it's just they haven't been listened to, and this is perhaps what happens in the extreme side when people aren't listened to and young people's voices aren't heard. This is obviously, you never want violence, but you know, it's shocking to see such young people involved.
Alana, your generation is constantly being told that this is a post-Good Friday Agreement generation that doesn't know conflict. You know, they're past the era of the Troubles, and this is a kind of a better society. Are you a generation that doesn't know conflict? Is that right?
In terms of like what happened, you know, back in the Troubles, the car bombs, the petrol bombs, like we don't know that, but we definitely know the societal kind of violence in terms of, you know, you walk down the wrong street and you're called this, like certain things like that. But now actually seeing like 13 and 14-year-olds out in the street, like my little sister is 14, and the thought of seeing her out in the street with a bomb in her hand makes me sick to my stomach. And as a unionist, to see on Facebook and Twitter that a whole community is being blamed for these things is tragic, because, you know, a small group of people does not speak for everybody. So, you know, there's a lot to kind of, you know, what's the word, like look into almost, but it is that nobody should be tarred with the same brush as this violence at the minute.
Do you think that there is a kind of a political vacuum there that's kind of...
Oh, 100%. Yeah, like, you know, there's been things shared on Facebook and Twitter recently, you know, and it's just like, it's not blaming these people rioting, it's blaming a whole community, and that's not fair.
Yeah. Naoise, what do you think about that? Are your lives now being defined? Are young people, the whole young people of Northern Ireland being kind of defined by what has happened in the past rather than what you actually think now?
I'm not too sure, but just on the back of the question there that you asked Alana about the post-GFA generation, I think it's unfair to state, because a lot of material conditions that resulted in conflict or perpetuated conflict still exist. I mean, the direct violence, maybe from paramilitaries and state actors, has gone to a certain extent, but people still live in interface areas, people still have to deal with paramilitaries, people have to still deal with political policing to an extent, and a lot of political battles are still sort of underway. And I think people sort of neglect the idea that there's transgenerational trauma. Like these battles and all didn't stop in 98. A lot of this was inherited. I mean, the North has one of the highest rates of PTSD, for example, in the world, and that doesn't come from anywhere, and it's still prevalent within young people, and that's what we're seeing with the mental health crisis. So the conflict may have ended in a grade in 98, but it didn't. The violence or battles or the political context around it is still relevant, you know.
And that's probably, or is it those kind of echoes of what has happened before that has led young people to still be involved in conflict like we saw?
Well, see what my take on what happened with what recent events there last night and tonight is that there's been an absolute failure of leadership. I mean, I was actually there last night because I've seen a lot of activists that I knew and a lot of people, community workers and stuff, and I wanted to give a hand where I could give it. And what I seen was people from in the Springfield Road kids that were obviously getting sucked into the protest that was happening on the interface from the other side, and community workers and political activists on the ground trying to stop them doing it and take them. I've seen old men taking bins off young people, trying to get them to prevent them from burning it. So there's a lack of leadership in certain sectors, and I think people need to call it out for what it is. Of course, the violence and the extent of it isn't what people have seen in the last recent decades, but regardless of that, there needs to be a clear sign of united leadership on this, you know.
Yeah. Hafsa, can I ask you what you make of all this? Because you arrived in Northern Ireland and maybe didn't know the complete context of how divided society was. And you live in West Belfast now. What do you think about what's happening around you at the moment?
Currently what's going on is actually a bit upsetting, you know, and everything going on. Thing is, everyone has its own history, you know. The main issue is that young kids are not being taught, you know, the violence and the past, you know, the troubling history we've had, you know, instead of just teaching, you know, like, I mean, every history is relevant, but then it's more relevant to wherever you live. So if kids are taught like the history that haven't happened here, and to teach them like, you know, like don't repeat history again, I think that would be more like, you know, it would be more suitable for kids instead of like look at all the stuff that are going on right now. History is repeating itself again, and I don't think that's really a good thing for our society and our generation, because a lot of young kids are going to lose their lives, you know, a lot of bad things could happen, and that's really unsettling. But yeah.
And you know, as a divided community, I suppose it's kind of confusing for people to constantly pick a side and constantly be looking at one side or the other and wondering what side of the divide you should be on. I mean, particularly as a young person, you kind of always want to fit in, I felt. And then in this particular issue, it is a completely polarized political divide that's existing. Did you find that in school and your peers around you? Is that the kind of charged atmosphere?
It's actually kind of, you know, it's like, you know, I'm Muslim and I'm neither Catholic nor a Protestant. And then I'm like, you know, like I'm in between. I'm like, you know, like lost cause in between. And then in school where you have, if you go to Catholic school, it's all about, you know, Catholic. And then, you know, especially being from a Catholic area, West Belfast. And then, you know, you look at the other side of the town, and then, you know, some teachers maybe teach you a little history, you know, from time to time, tell you what used to happen. And you're like, this is kind of surprising. But then one question that settled with me, and I kept on asking around a lot, was like, why do we have to resolve everything with violence? Like, the people are the same. It's like literally, it's like one country, one people, all divided into two, based on what political views or like religious, you know, disbeliefs or whatever sectors everyone believes. Thing is, we need to come together and like, you know, try to resolve issue. And it may not have started with like the older generation, but this is something we can do as a younger generation, you know, teach us and the younger generation, you know, try to evolve, not repeat history again. And like, violence just ruins everything, honestly.
Yeah, and the point about the older generations, Dermot, that kind of, is that what's pushing younger people, 13 and 14-year-olds we saw last night getting involved. Is that what's driving young people to get involved in violent or law-breaking kind of acts again? Is it a family history thing? Is it an absence of a place to belong in their own society? Is it not lack of opportunity? What is kind of the impetus, do you think, for young people to get involved in violence?
Well, I mean, I've never been out ratting, so I can't, speak from my own experience. But from what I'm seeing is it seems to be just adults telling, kids, because that's what they are, they're children, to go out and, I suppose, fight for their community. But it really isn't. Like, you see, there's been videos now of adults cheering on groups of young lads as young as 12, 13, 14, bringing wheelie bins to go throw at the police or to throw petrol bombs at the police. It seems to be just the adults are telling the kids what to do, and it's kids who are getting in trouble for it. It's young lads who are going out, they're petrol bombing a police Land Rover, and then they're getting in trouble for it. Whereas the ones who are actually stirring it up, the ones who are actually stirring up at all of the tension, they're not getting in trouble at all. They're not facing the consequences because it's a young lad who gets a criminal record. It's not some secretive UDA man or an owl dissident Republican. It's always constantly young working class lads who are now getting in trouble because they petrol bombed a Land Rover or they threw a burning wheelie bin. They're the ones causing the havoc. It's not their own ideas. It's people who are telling them what to do. They didn't come up with the idea to go out ratting themselves. It was the older generation who did that, not ours.
Yeah. Alana, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, with that, like with you're saying about the old people or the older generations pushing the young people, sorry, my dog, I just think it's about the way that young people interpret their anger. Because to me, to see the failures of politicians, that makes me want to go into politics. That makes me want to make a difference. To other people, that might be, oh, I need to, destroy the other side. But it is, again, how you kind of interpret your anger and your frustrations and kind of like what you feel on the issues. But there is healthier ways of helping these kids deal with it. Like there's cross-community camps run all over the towns, like here, like in Portadown. And like generations ago, my parents never would have even, spoken to people down these roads. And now I'm close friends with them because these projects are being run. So if there was more of them in places like there are rioting, with those wee lads throw a bottle thinking that's going to hit one of my mates. It's the divide being kept is increasing this.
Anisha, do you want to add to what Alana said?
I think there's a lot of like a complex or very much hyper complex sort of issue here, or people make it more complex than what it is, because I mean a lot of this is recreational riding. I mean, like there shouldn't be a sort of like a lot of these kids from 12 to 15 or 16 or something. Ask them about the protocol, ask them about Stormont or the political situation here. It's not the case. There's a buzz. I mean, that's where it was like when I was growing up, when I grew up in their phases, more people were riding for a buzz of it or for the crack, and it became recreational riding rather than for a political purpose, one way or the other. And I mean, these areas where there is interfaces, there is youth workers, there is cross community groups. It's just a case of like political crisis being manipulated by certain sectors and then it being brewed onto a street or being brewed onto an interface, where incidents such as last night do happen, but it's very rare and it's very sort of sporadic. And the young people who were involved last night, no doubt that they're not ratting either or say because of Stormont or because of anything. They're ratting because one, they see a chance to have make a night's fun out of it. Do you know what I mean? And I think, the more overcomplicated we make this issue, we'll miss the really sort of realistic reality or the reality of it on the ground,
Yeah, the solutions to it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question to everyone there? So anyone feel free to jump in. Are young people worried about this threat of violence or, riots, disruption increasing from now on, because even though they mightn't have been caused by the protocol, by the Bobby Story funeral incident, they're kind of feeding into it in some way, it seems. So are you going to see now, are you afraid that basically Northern Ireland's past is going to be its future for the next while?
I think it's more about like we are terrified, but at the moment it's in Belfast and it's in Londonderry, and whilst those are big cities and things happen in every city, this is kind of where it seems to be normal, if that makes any sense to us. The way we've grown up, like all the rioting in Belfast, the rioting in Londonderry. But the moment that this starts to break out in the smaller towns and the smaller cities, like it has, with all the banners and the paramilitary like photos and everything that have been put up around little small towns, it's making you think, this isn't just a big people in Belfast issue, this is a countrywide issue.
Dermot?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Alana there. We're almost used to the rat in Belfast or whatever, but now it's like if it starts moving down to Portadown and in Newry, like once it starts reaching into those tiny towns where you're not so much or whatever, once it starts getting closer and bigger and more widespread, that's whenever you start to worry. That's whenever you start to worry, is somebody going to be killed this time? Is it going to be more than a couple of police officers injured? Is it going to be more than the odd petrol bomb? Like, at what point is it going to turn really sour compared to what it is now, where it's a couple of petrol bombs and, it is bad, but it's the worry that it could get really bad. And that's what I'm personally afraid of.
Jay, can I ask you, were you surprised, I suppose, to see this happen in Belfast? And are you kind of worried about the mental health impacts that kind of maybe not just one, but just repeated incidents increasing in their, their intensity, what that will do to young people?
Well, I think it was absolutely a surprise. I don't think anyone was anticipating just 8 days of rioting in Belfast, but Northern Ireland already has frighteningly high for mental health for young people. And this sort of involvement with young people in these events or in these actions, that's going to negatively impact those involved. It's going to impact the communities they live in once they go to school and when they return on Monday. That will be the conversation in school there. That's their friends and their peers. And it is frightening. And, we're all about mental health in schools and that sort of thing. There isn't a lot of support in schools. So once they go to school, and if it's getting to them there, we worry what sort of support are they going to have when they get there.
Naoise, do you want to come in there on the kind of the impact kind of conflict has on younger people long term?
I think, we're still dealing with legacies of conflict that was meant to be ended in 98. It was a said at the start that NI has one of the highest rates of PTSD, for example, in the world, and trauma that isn't dealt with through dealing with legacy or and closing down cases and helping families breathe and stuff like that is passed on. These behaviours, anxieties, and whether people are constant or not, are passed down to generations. So, unless the conflict, and unless legacy of the conflict here is dealt with, we will see a unique context here where young people will still suffer mentally from the conflict. You look at people such as Gabor Mate and others that read about trauma and addiction and whatever else. Every area or every place that suffer from conflict or colonialism, whatever it may be, all suffer the same patterns of high rates of addiction and PTSD and depression, for example. So yeah, conflict is intertwined in it all.
Yeah. Hafsa, can I ask you, were you surprised at the riots last night, and what do you think about the support in schools, mental health supports in particular?
It's quite surprising. However, all of these things, like, I agree with him. Like, there's just ongoing generational thing that's going on. But the thing is, with our community, with our society, and like our younger generation, we should support more our cross community, what is it called, mental health issues, or like communities that could support younger people, and like move on from this mindset that the divided communities and all of that stuff.
I'm going to leave that issue or that kind of theme there for the moment, and I want to kind of ask the panel more broadly what life is like in Northern Ireland in general at the moment as a young person, what opportunities there are, what the social life is like, what education is like, I wonder if I could ask you all in a minute or so to talk about how you feel life is like for you and how you see your future there. Could I maybe start with you, Hafsa?
Sorry, can you just repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah, sure, no problem. No, what is life? How do you find life in Northern Ireland like at the moment? How do you describe it? How's the social life? How is education? How are how would you describe it?
Actually, living in Northern Ireland is not bad. It's actually good. But the thing is, we just need to encourage more multicultural. Bring more cultures into school. Teach people that there's other people out there, other religions. And in school, when you say you don't eat this or you don't know this or like, oh, you can't do this because based on your cultural beliefs or like religious beliefs, everyone's like surprised, shocked. But then the issue is the system does not teach anyone anything. The system does not, it's not a system that's based on multicultural or like, it's just divided communities. And then it's like they don't have time for like more cultures, to jump in and stuff.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to go next on that? Or? Yeah, Dermot.
Well, I suppose with lockdown and all, everything has kind of been put on hold. We've been kind of forced to, I suppose, find new ways to have a social life. And while yes, we are seeing a bit of a change in restrictions and stuff like that, between lockdown and the current political tension, I suppose you could call it, the social life it's gone. Like living in Northern Ireland or the north of Ireland or the 6 counties, call it what you want, but it's just kind of, it's a mess now. And with the lockdown, we don't actually get to do anything. So with then you're watching Belfast, you get worried. It's not good for your mental health because you're thinking, God, what if there's going to be another troubles and I'm stuck in the house? It's a mess at the minute, and we don't really have a social life anymore. We don't have a life, and it's terrible. Like,
can I ask, because you're obviously, your podcast and your blog is about politics in Northern Ireland. Are young people getting involved in politics in the way kind of Alana touched on earlier, where they want to make a difference and is there kind of a healthy interest in wanting to be involved in politics?
I think there is, to an extent. Like, there is, yes, a lot of young people involved in politics. Look at all of us, and you've got your youth wings and all of these different organizations like the student unions and mental health organizations. But I mean, if it was up to me, there'd be even more. And I don't think there's enough of us. Like, there is still a very small group who are doing everything. Like, I know I'm involved in 4 or 5 different organizations with student work and mental health work and running my podcast. But like, there is an interest. There's definitely a demand to get more young people involved. I know we're getting a youth assembly soon, and that should hopefully get even more young people involved. So I think there is a lot of us, but there's still not enough.
Does someone else want to go next? I'm wondering what do people in Northern Ireland care about most at the moment? Is it education, opportunities? Is it just simply peace?
One of the things with education, though, is the brain drain. So thousands of students leave Northern Ireland every year. At the minute, from Northern Ireland, there are 17,500 students studying elsewhere, and that's enough to fill a whole other university. And we have to ask ourselves, like, why aren't people staying here? I'm leaving. I didn't make a single application to Northern Ireland because I'm going on to study politics. Why would I want to study politics? This is my view. In a place that I'm going to go up to Queen's or Ulster and I'm going to say, hi, I'm from Portadown and I'm a unionist, and I'm going to be immediately pushed into a box by my peers. And it's the sad reality of it that, there is that kind of thing that you don't want to stay here because you spent your whole life being stereotyped from what your name is or what town you're from. So there's no wonder people leave. And like with education as well, I came from a slightly different background with education. Down in Portadown, we have this thing called the Dixon Plan. So we have a junior high for 3 years and then we go on to a senior high. So we don't do academic transfer tests in P7, we do them in third year instead. And if we look at the stress that academic transfer test puts on children in P7, based on the people in my system, it's clear to see that there are, huge problems in our education system, and there is no wonder why people are leaving by the hundreds.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Especially when you want kind of all the opportunity you can get, and if you're already being judged as you start, it's already limiting your options. Naoise, can I ask you what you think about, the limited opportunities? Because you talked about how rioting is just kind of something to do for young people.
Yeah. I think seeing this, and it's a pattern with any country that's suffering with economically. There's a long history in Ireland, north and south, of people immigrating to America, England, Australia, and whatnot, and it's just based on socio-economic conditions within the given area, and this all feeds into how conflict is perpetuated in these areas. And if there isn't a shift in how the economic organisation of this state or its societies is changed, then there won't be a change in how people immigrate or how people then subsequently get involved in paramilitary organisations or rioting. For example, I think when you look at the Northern State, for an example, when you see the Black Grant and how the sort of economics or the financial capital of this place is determined by a Black Grant from Westminster, you're limited in a way of what you want to spend. What are you going to spend your $7 billion on? Like, you're sort of limited on what you can do with that. And if we're talking about investment and getting more opportunities for young people, more opportunities for people to stay here, getting invested in certain sectors and stuff, there's not much there isn't much financial leeway for government here to do so. So I think then that's when we boil into constitutional questions of like, are we best served by Westminster and the Black Grant, or is there a chance for us to open up a new that sort of democracy in a new state by having conversations with the South, for example? And then does that give us more political and economic power, or is it more best off with the Black Grant?
Yeah, we'll come back to that in a second. Just finally, Jay, mental health is such a big issue for young people, and education as well, educational opportunities. Are young people kind of calling for more of that now more than ever? Is there kind of like a growing movement for kind of better mental health care in Northern Ireland?
Well, I'd say absolutely. We set up the Young People's Wellbeing Council a month or two ago, and it's made up of 40 young people from across Northern Ireland who, from a range of different political, religious, educational, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And through the council, we want to get these young people talking about mental health and about policy and what real changes could be made to improve young people's mental health. We had loads of interest and loads of applicants. We've got committees that are led by pupils in secondary schools across Northern Ireland, and we've got more and more people asking to set them up. So it is a really big issue for people here. Youth mental health, the youth suicide rate in Northern Ireland is almost twice as high as it is in England. Yet the funding for mental health is a quarter less here. Okay. So there is an imbalance.
Yeah, that's a stark figure, and you wouldn't imagine it would be much improved after COVID either.
No.
On the topic that Naoise kind of touched on there, like a greater relationship with the South, what do you all think of a shared island, a more shared island, or a united Ireland? Because before it was a policy of Sinn Féin's maybe primarily, and now it seems to be kind of dominating the discussion a bit more because of the post-Brexit situation. Dermot, do you want to start?
Well, I'm a nationalist. I believe in a united Ireland, and I've never been very quiet about that. It's brilliant to see this conversation starting, and I'm glad to see that we are having these conversations, that we're willing to talk about it. And I hope that it won't just be the nationalist community talking about it. I hope we'll reach across the barricades. I hope we'll get unionists involved in the conversation to hear the concerns regarding United Ireland. I hope we get people who are, wholeheartedly against it. I hope we hear from those who could be swayed. I want to hear from right across the, political spectrum. I'm a big believer in the United Ireland, but I don't think it can ever just be a case of, we'll stick on the 6 and on to the 26 and we'll have our own wee kind of country, we have to set up a whole new system. There'll have to be systematic changes. There will have to be a healthcare, free healthcare down south. There'll have to be a massive change in the education system, because, to be honest, the education system down south is not acceptable. I know, to me, it's something I wouldn't want to put my kids into. So I think there's a lot of different issues that will have to be, looked at. They'll have to be changed and dealt with before we can actually, look at a referendum or looking at a poll. We have to get all of these things discussed and dealt with before we can even think about having a border poll.
Alana, what do you think? You're obviously a unionist, and Dermot said he wants to hear from people of all political persuasions. What do you think?
Whilst I love the idea of everyone on the island living happily ever after as one, we need to think that, I don't just speak for myself, I speak for a huge community. There's not a single drop of blood in my body that I would consider Irish. I do not class myself as Irish because, my ancestors are Scottish. I've grown up in a British household with no Irish, connections at all. And whilst it is lovely to think of our whole community, coinciding together, it's difficult because I would suddenly go from being a British citizen to being an Irish citizen, and there's not a part of me that actually identifies with that. And, whilst I have no problem with, any other side, like, I literally am part of a program that brings both sides together. I think it's important that we both have our identities and we're allowed to have them. But we should, obviously a lot more work should be done in terms of bringing them together and making people a lot more, considerate of one another. So it's not a divide more so, but just two communities living in the same kind of space.
Naoise, what do you think is it talk about a shared island or united Ireland the last thing Northern Ireland needs right now?
No, I feel it's something that maybe the North needs. Now the discussion needs to happen now. But Brexit has certainly accelerated the discussion on United Ireland, and it's up for people and the stakeholders, North and South, to get involved. I think Alana's point was interesting around identity, the fact that she might not feel comfortable in Ireland as a British citizen. But I feel like we've already sort of crossed that point with the Good Friday Agreement. The Good Friday Agreement allows for people to be either British or Irish or both. So. And I don't think there's any calls from any sort of sector of political makeup in Ireland that's saying that if there was an event of United Ireland, that people won't be allowed to be British citizens. I think most people, anyone that's from the nicest or Republican perspective, saying that no, if there's an event of United Ireland, unionism and the unionist community need to feel comfortable more than probably the nicest community because of the historical context of it all. And I mean, there's discussions about federalism and about the role of the Orange Water in the United Ireland stuff, and this is all discussions we need to be having. And I don't think there's calls from any sector of marginalising anyone or putting anyone on the sideline. I think that when we take an agonist out of the context, and when we are left on this island to decide our own fate, I think that's where good things can happen. So when the makeup of the society here is determined by factors such as political hiccups or the fallouts in Westminster and then subsequently becoming riots or so on the streets here, that people here can decide for them. And I'm probably quoting Ian Paisley here, where he says that people here should be able to decide their own fate. And I think that's where we need to be heading. The people here, Unionists and Nationalists, North and South, should be left to their own devices to decide what's best for themselves.
Do you think though that because of things are so volatile in Northern Ireland at the moment that it's not helpful to talk about United Ireland, or is it that the discussion needs to be different than what it has been traditionally?
No, I think there needs to be a role. I think there's where the role of leadership plays into it, and it depends on how certain sections of the political makeup here can deal with incidents such as last night or whatever else. I mean, if I'm not too sure if one of the demands or one of the calls last night was against United Ireland. I'm not too sure. It keeps adding every day for something else. But I don't think anyone. I don't think there's going to be a real violent uproar. I think we've passed that. Really have. And instances such as last night, like I said, the start are sporadic and very rare. And any discussion that's been led at the moment on United Ireland has been very well done. It's been constitutional, and it's been led by people that are in leadership positions, including the DUP as well. They've been on the RT the other week, and it was brilliant to see. I've never in my lifetime expected to see RT hold a panel debate on United Ireland with Unionists and people from all sort of sections of society, and I thought it was amazing. So I think that's where we're going, and I think we should be confident in that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Hafsa, can I ask you what you think about the debate about a united Ireland or Northern Ireland's place in the Union? Say that again.
I'll leave myself out of that one. Sorry.
You don't feel comfortable to be part of that, or is it? Do you feel like that debate doesn't belong to you? Is it?
I wouldn't certainly say that, but I would say I'm not educated enough on that topic.
Okay, that's fair enough. That's fair enough. Jay, can I ask you then to come in? What do your peers and your friends think of the debate around a united Ireland? Are they interested in it? Are they kind of intrigued by what opportunities maybe they could get if there were closer links to Ireland, or are they happy enough with the kind of constitutional place of Northern Ireland in the Union?
Well, these of people I know vary greatly, and there's certainly people who see the benefits, and there's certainly people who don't, and there's certainly people who are much comfortable in the Union. And all public debate is good, and I think it should be an informed and accurate discussion around it, pros and cons of each way. But like as a representative of Pure Mental, I don't think I'd be too comfortable, going in depth too much.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine. I kind of want to talk to you a bit about identity there, Alana, that you mentioned before. It's really interesting when we see how young people are getting involved in politics. They're kind of social movements, that the same-sex marriage referendum, the pro-choice referendum down here, and that they wear symbols of that to kind of identify themselves with those movements. That's kind of a really important part of young people's identity. Are young people in Northern Ireland able to identify with those different social movements without?
There is a struggle for identity here because, if you're a nationalist, you're almost tarred with you agree with this, and if you're a unionist, you're tarred with you agree with this. I went on a political talk show a while ago, and you had to designate yourself as unionist, nationalist, or other. And I would, myself be quite liberal in my views. Like, I'd be very pro-choice, pro-same-sex marriage, things like that. Like, in social kind of situations. And I was asked, like, oh, you're not gonna like designate yourself as other? And I was all like, no, I'm still a unionist. And just because I don't identify with the hard right of the DUP does not mean that I'm any less a unionist or any less British. Like, it's when I started A-level politics, we were brought into the room and we were taught what is right wing and what is left wing. And in Northern Ireland, if you were a unionist, you matched up with the right, and if you were a nationalist, you matched up with the left. And I just think there's so much to be seen here, around identity, because just because I'm on this side for something else, I can be on another side for something completely different. And that doesn't make me any less of anything else that I identify with. And especially for like the up and coming like LGBT community in Northern Ireland, the fact that, so many kids in my generation especially grew up surrounded by, you can't marry, you can't love the person you love. And now that's okay legally, but the kind of tension towards, LGBT is still there, deep set in the communities, and that's nobody's fault. But, there is a lot with identity here that is difficult, and a lot that the minute you say something, you're assumed to be something else. And that is something we need to work on.
Is part of that a problem with the political parties that represent unionism and nationalism?
I would agree with that, because, when I say I am a unionist, people are like, oh, you support the DUP? And it's like, no, I don't. Not for one moment would I ever vote DUP. I personally identify with the Ulster Unionist Party, and people just think, oh, they're just a softer DUP or whatever. But to me, they are still as unionist as the DUP, but allow you to have more thought on other things. And now I can't speak for the nationalist side because, you know, I'm not that educated on the differences with Sinn Féin and the SDLP, but I'm sure there is many nationalists that when they say they are, people assume they're Sinn Féin and they don't want to be assumed as that.
That's a good point. That's, you know, the ever blurring lines between extreme politics.
It's the polar opposites, really.
Yeah. Hafsa, can I ask you about identity? Because you wear a hijab and that's part of your identity. Is that difficult when you mentioned the divide between Catholic and Protestant communities? Are you able to express what you feel, you know, comfortably, I suppose, from day to day?
Definitely, I actually do that. But the question is, you know, I mean, everyone does get, you know, weird questions from here and there, but it's all right, you know, because what's life, you know, without getting, what is it called, asked weird questions. But practicing my religious beliefs is definitely not a hard thing, aside from being told sometimes go back to your home or some weird stuff like that, but it's all right, you know.
And do you feel that, you know, you can take part in, say, the GAA, or, you know, to kind of take part in kind of maybe British celebrations, or express interest in the monarchy, for example, without kind of feeling too pressured to do that or not do that?
To be honest, I don't participate in any, you know, political, you know, riots or political, you know, anything to do with political, you know, world. So I stay out of that.
No problem.
Just to stay on the safe side.
Can I ask you, Dermot, what you think about the kind of polarization there of identity, and kind of, especially when young people are trying to figure out who they are and what cause they kind of are passionate about? Is it difficult?
I think it definitely is. Like, I know it's something kind of Alana drew on, is the idea that if you are one, you are the other as well. So if I'm a nationalist, a lot of the time I'm grouped in and told that I'm a Catholic. But yes, I might have been baptized, but I'm not a believer. I'm an atheist. If I'm a Catholic, or if I'm a nationalist, I must believe in certain things, or I must be an Irish speaker. And there are a lot of different areas where you must be one, and if you are one, you must be the other. And I think as well, it is very polarized. It is very with people kind of, if you are down the middle, or if you're, oh, well, I support Sinn Féin, but I criticize them on this, or if I support the SDLP, I criticize them here, and I disagree with certain positions. I think you are always kind of pushed and told that, no, you can't disagree with this because you support one of their policies. Like, I support a United Ireland. Now, I don't agree with, you know, the SDLP's position on abortion, and a lot of the time I don't agree with Sinn Féin's because I often find it's too conservative, or their economic policies. Like, you are kind of, if you support a party and because you support United Ireland, you support Irish language rights, you are almost then told that you have to support the whole thing. And I think that's another thing that we do have to look at, whereas you can pick and choose what you believe in and you don't have to conform to the entire thing, because that's that damages the whole, political discourse. And I don't support that in any way.
Naoise, you're an Irish speaker, so how is the Irish language used, I suppose, and viewed as something political in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, well, the last time I saw a bond school was man school was in Chin when you may came Segregation to North Belfast. So I've been through Irish language education from a nursery right up until I did my degree in Irish at Queen's. But see, when I was growing up, and it's a whole thing about identity. So when I was growing up in New Lodge, you walk past Churchill Street, past Lancaster Street, down on the Victoria Parade, seen all the war memorials, walked up the Dublin Road, or whatever it may have been, went to Queen's University, seen all these war memorials and for the British Army and all that stuff in Queen's. And I was sort of going, and then when all this debate around the Irish Language Act and Irish language was contentious or politicized, I was going, like, I'm walking all around these places, and every single street or building or whatever else is named after some royal or English royal or English leader or whatever it may have been. And I'm going, like, what's politicized here? I mean, we were getting told during our campaign in Queen's that we were politicizing Irish language. And, like, the only people politicizing Irish language or the identity is people that are against it for political reasons. They're equating it. People are equating, like, the Irish Language Act with, Brexit or like some sort of like some fella made a point about marching up the street being an orange order a few years ago, and like these issues, it just shows you that any sort of attempt for progress, and in my case was for Irish language rights, was met with this idea that change was seen as a threat to the peace, or change was seen as a threat to whatever power they had at the time, or whatever thing they were going to cling on to. So for being an Irish language speaker at the present time is exciting, but it's also frustrating because the courts, like Conor McGilligan, are dragging the executive through the courts at the minute again because of failure to implement an Irish language strategy. And the Irish Language Act has been promised 3 times in the last 10 or so years. So where's the problem, lads? Is people not being able to accept the Irish language activists and the Irish language communities for what they are, or is there a deeper issue at hand here, and is it to do with bigotry? And these are the questions we need to be asking. But I mean, like in the North, and probably go back to the last question about growing up and living here, like the North's great. Like some of the sense of community in these areas, and like the friendships and the solidarity in these communities is brilliant. I'm not saying anywhere else in Ireland, probably. I mean, during the COVID response, people were out straight away. They weren't involved in any groups, just out doing parcels, delivering, and helping out their neighbours helping their neighbours in an organised fashion. Like, it was really, really organised community response, and you were proud of that. You were proud of seeing that sort of stuff. But in the case of identity, being an Irish language activist, you're sort of told it's your fault, and but in a state where your language is sort of shaking the core of it, and you need to ask questions. Why is it?
Yeah, Alana, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, just adding like on Naoise's point about Irish language, like I know, like a lot of people that genuinely have no problem with other people, speaking Irish. But I think a lot of the kind of stigma that comes from it is the fact that we don't have an equivalent that's as widely spread. It's not that it sounds scary, but almost when people from 10 minutes down the road from you are able to speak completely different language to each other and have these little sayings in a completely different language, it's almost isolating, because you feel like, what part of my identity do I have to apply to this? And, a lot of the times, like, I think it's a beautiful language, and it's just like, I don't understand it. So I don't understand, the attachment you guys have to it. And I think that is a thing for a lot of people, they don't understand how much it means, like, to the Irish community to be able to speak this.
Yeah. I think that's a similar, just very quickly, Naoise, I think that's a similar debate to down here. There's people who call themselves Irish in the Republic who might not understand why Irish speakers want to speak Irish, and they don't understand it. You're actually echoing a similar debate in the Republic about the Irish language. Naoise, do you want to jump in?
I think another point you raised is interesting about feeling comfortable or whatever it is when people speak in another language, and I think that's to do with maybe sometimes having a look internally and thinking, why does it make me feel uncomfortable hearing a different language? Is it something, is it a fear? Where does the fear come from? Who's telling me there's something to be worried about? I mean, in Irish, like, I mean, it was only up to 150 years ago, most people in this island were speaking Irish. So what happened in those 150 years? And this is people from a Protestant Unionist persuasion and people from an Irish Republican Catholic persuasion. Most people here were speaking Irish. So what happened those last 150 years? Where is those fears coming from? Where is this discomfort come from as well? And you're right, this is something maybe that is a case of education, or people get more information and engaging with the Irish language community more and find out what it is. But this is the whole point of the Irish Language Act, is that these decisions and these sort of instances and problems aren't being dealt with by politicians and people from particular persuasions. It should be in legislation protected with human rights, so it isn't up for debate.
Jay, I'm going to ask the next question, put the next question to you. Stormont's Justice Minister Naoise Ó Cuilín had a really powerful point when she talked about how segregated Northern Ireland is, and how if the two communities look very different, you'd be shocked about how segregated people are. I wonder, does that limit the people there are in young people's lives? Does that limit the experiences that they have? How does that affect young people, that kind of segregation?
Well, young people and everybody in Northern Ireland share much more in common than they have that separates them. And whenever people are divided by those single defining features, whether they're unionist or nationalist, it does limit them. It limits in the places that they feel comfortable, the people that they meet, the schools they go to even. And I think particularly in those areas that perhaps are labelled Republican or Loyalist, it's particularly even the areas where the violence has been happening the past few days, I think even those labels can lead to them being neglected or they're not taken seriously in some discussions. It can lead to economic deprivation. I think it has a rippling effect. Perhaps a better approach is just to approach Northern Ireland as one, as a whole, and to apply legislation and funding to all communities equally.
Yeah, and I suppose the bigger your world is, the more opportunities you have, and the more people you meet, the more opportunities you have.
Absolutely.
Do you want to add?
I think I'd want to draw on something Jay said there. It wasn't until I started probably getting involved in politics and getting involved in, interviews and stuff like that, that it actually started to properly meet people from, I suppose, the other side of the community. And the first time I started talking to, I say, Protestant young people, like I come from a very kind of nationalist community where I go to always went to a Catholic school. I'd say a massive majority of the people in my school would be nationalists or Republicans. So there is a massive still kind of issue of segregation there, and there's programs that will try and integrate the place a lot more, but there's a lot more to be done there because we are so segregated, and that's something that has failed to properly change, and it's something that needs changed if we can ever make progress.
Are young people, if they come from a nationalist family or a unionist family, are they still identifying as nationalists themselves, or like a bit like what you said, where you're baptized but you're atheist? Are young people breaking that chain?
I think there are some. I mean, I'm a terrible example because I'm a strong believer in a United Ireland, so I'm a nationalist, I'm a Republican. But I think there are definitely people who are believers. They might have come from a unionist family and have believe in the United Ireland. I actually know people who would have been who have very conservative parents, and yet they're in PBP and they're socialists. So you can definitely break away from your family, and you're not defined by what your family believes in. You are defined by what you believe in, and you can certainly make your own principles and find your own beliefs. I think it doesn't happen very often, but it definitely can. It's not impossible, and I encourage people who possibly do come from a more conservative background, or actually do disagree with their parents on things, to absolutely have those disagreements and find your own voice and find what you believe in.
Yeah, it's a good message to tread your own path. Hafsa, can I ask you about new communities in Northern Ireland? They're a kind of a growing group, and particularly among young people, can they bridge gaps in a way kind of maybe that no one else can in Northern Ireland?
Certainly can. I was part of what's called a youth group for women only, supporting women, and yeah, we opened up to kind of and integrate with like just not one community, but like a lot of young women from different ethnicities and background, to try and like even for the marginalized communities, to integrate and become one. And it's certainly not an easy thing to do, but then we just had to like pass on the message to the others, and like we were planning on, before this whole COVID thing came in, we were planning on going to schools and like giving assemblies to kind of make the issue aware, like make others know of what's going on and stuff, and like we're open to bringing like different people. And yeah
and like, talk to me about how the community integrates with kind of Northern Ireland. Are you hopeful that kind of that is a good kind of future for Northern Ireland? I suppose like that is a good way forward of building a society that's kind of a little bit maybe more accepting of people who are different than your family or your friends or what you know.
Yes, definitely. I went to a different school to do my GCSEs, And that was actually a really welcoming school. They had like different, like I would say like 40% of people from that school were like from different countries, and everyone was actually really welcoming. And like the area that I live in currently, everyone's like really nice. Like it's like like it's like we're part of the community. It doesn't matter where we're from and what our background is, and it's just a matter of everyone integrating with others, instead of being marginalized or like like dividing the community, or someone's nationalist or unionist, or they're Catholic or something like that. But anyways, yeah.
Yeah. It's just I might finish the discussion off, the general discussion, with a quote from the CEO of Groundwork Northern Ireland, Caracas Marley, that said that young people in Northern Ireland are really impressive. They're articulate and they're brave and they're engaged in issues that matter. And she said that they're coming for us and we should let them. So, and with that in mind, can I ask everyone to list problems Northern Ireland should tackle, how the Northern Ireland should work with Westminster and with Dublin to kind of deal with those problems, and particularly ones that affect young people predominantly. Alana, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, I am the co-founder and the communications officer, sorry about my dog, of the Secondary Students' Union of Northern Ireland. So we founded at a time that our education minister was able to stand up and say, I consulted stakeholders, teachers, and parents, not the young people, not the young people whose futures would literally be decided by this man and his decision on how we would be awarded grades. And there is so little kind of consultation of young people in government. Like, I've been working quite closely the last few days with the Irish Secondary Students' Union, and they literally receive funding from their government. They have a full-time staff member, so anytime there's an education issue, they're able to be talked to. And we have officers, we have a mental health officer, we have a community relations officer. So for every single issue that affects young people, we have someone. And whilst we're small, we in the last year have managed to get 25,000 members across Northern Ireland. And whilst it's nothing compared to what the South has, and we've a lot smaller population, it shows that young people feel the need to be consulted. And like Dermot mentioned about the youth assembly, it's great. We will have a chance to stand for election. Now, we do have the youth parliament, who've actually sadly lost their funding at the moment, and aren't able to hold elections to actually go over to Westminster and sit as youth members of youth parliament. But there is that feeling that young people want to be involved but possibly can't get involved. So organisations like Pure Mental, like the Students' Union, even Dermot's podcast, are helping young people get a platform and actually say, you're responsible for how my life works out, and I want to question you on that.
Yeah, that's great. Jade, you want to... Pure Mental is obviously a really vibrant organisation, working towards what Alana is saying. What do you see ways of fixing maybe educational mental health issues in Northern Ireland in the future? How can it be done?
Well, I'd like to echo some of what Alana said about the lack of consultation, and it's something we find time and time again, is also a lack of consultation with principals and with teachers themselves. Like, we have principals telling us that they're given documents that they had no heads up about, and the school return, some principals were given documents on the Friday and the return was on the Monday, and they had to read and implement what was in those documents before then. So there's a lack of communication. And I think when it comes to mental health education anyway, we know for a fact that schools want to make an improvement. Schools are keen to look after the well-being of young people, but there isn't the communication and the cooperation from the executive and the Department of Education that there ought to be. In the work that we do, it does sometimes feel like we hit a brick wall every time we've done a load of work. We present it to the Department of Education, and we're sent a stock letter back, basically saying, thank you, it's a priority, and little comes of it. But in terms of what can make changes, we think that young people need an emotional vocabulary to help them explain what's on their mind, so they know what help's available, what for, and where to get it. We think the services like CAMS, the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Services, which is currently a 9 to 5 service, that it needs a reform to make sure that it's more inclusive and it's more adaptable for all young people. We think that teachers need to be equipped to handle mental health emergencies if they arise in school. And we think it's key that mental well-being as well as physical well-being are treated on par in school, primary and secondary level.
Yeah, and that's kind of a movement that echoes what's happening globally, I suppose, a greater awareness of mental health. Dermot, do you want to tell us what you think Northern Ireland should be fixing as a priority, and how that should be done?
Well, I think if the executive ring me tomorrow and give me full control, I'd be like, the education system needs a lot of reform. It needs a lot of restructuring. We need greater focus on integration. I think the whole kind of segregating of Catholics and Protestant students, even a lot of us who don't believe in it, we've been segregated, we've been ripped apart, we're being kept apart until really we go to uni, or if we get involved outside of school. And I think specifically at religious education, I think we also have to look at how it's taught and what is taught. Like, I know people who have said they've had their rights debated in a classroom, and I just don't think that's acceptable. That's mental, and it's absolutely not acceptable. That things like that have to be dealt with, where we look at things more analytically rather than we don't debate people's rights, especially not in a GCSE class. Like, there are so many issues in education that need dealt with, and we need to start getting people talking. We need to get people together rather than keeping us segregated as young people and giving young people a voice. I think one other issue that I'll very quickly to say is votes at 16 is a big thing that I've been a pusher for, because it's great young people having a voice. It's great young people talking and raising our issues, but we're not listened to if we don't have a stake. If we don't have a vote, we will be, oh yeah, we're listening, we promise, we're definitely listening to you. But unless there's an election coming, we aren't listened to at all. We're told we're being listened to, but our concerns aren't being actually properly raised. So if we young people have a vote, we have teeth, and that means that we can actually make sure our issues are raised, and we can decide who it is that's raising them.
Yeah, good point about the vote at 16. Hafsa, can I ask you about the school issue? And obviously you're involved, you mentioned the groups that you're involved in. What, for your experience with that, what do you think Northern Ireland can fix or can do better?
Just going to elaborate on so far what I've experienced. I think, Northern Ireland should invest more into schools. They should provide individual supports for like students that are maybe good, because not everyone has, a stable lifestyle at home, everyone has a different lifestyle back at home. And, you can't just, I think there should be some sort of support for like students because I've experienced this. During GCSEs, I've met this guy. He was really, really smart. And then somehow, I don't know, from what I'm thinking, maybe something happened to him at home. But he went from really being really, really smart to explaining things. And then he just went all of a sudden, I don't care. I don't want to do my GCSEs anymore. And then teachers were just like, putting him aside just because he doesn't want to do anything. And then I was thinking, maybe he deserved to be, put into some sort of, given some sort of support, instead of just saying, oh, he doesn't want to do his work and then just putting him aside. He should have gotten some sort of like mental health support or like any other type of support, because that's what everyone needs. And yeah, everyone should get like, and also schools should provide extra curriculum activities, after school for, many students who would need that. And, even like, get them off streets or like, like doing unnecessary things that could affect, their long-term, life or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point about support in schools for young people when they maybe need it most. Naoise, can I ask you to share your thoughts about what Ireland can be doing, or what Northern Ireland can be doing better to support its young people and just in general as well?
Well, there needs to be a big drive to solve inequality and poverty that exists within working class communities here. I'm not too sure we also made the point, Jay, that these areas that are where the violence or sectarianism is rife, is the most poorest or depraved there is in the north. So I think there's a job at hand for the sort inequality and then subsequently sorting sectarianism, and then dealing with, we need to deal with the legacy of the conflict now, or else it'll just be passed on to future generations.
It's universal message, I think. Yeah, thank you for that, Naoise. I'm going to turn to the Q&A question section of the talk. So we have a couple of questions in, and if anybody else wants to add them, there is the chat function there. So I'll start with this one from Aoife, who asks, what impact do you think the DUP had on the situation? I assume she's talking about the riots in Belfast and their response throughout. As a person, I suppose I might go to Alana on that first, since you've mentioned as a unionist your criticism of them.
Yeah, well, I think it's unfair to blame a political party for any form of riots, because, you know, Arlene Foster's not standing up on a podium and saying, go get your petrol bombs and throw them at buses. You know, it's unfair to tar a political party by what their voters are doing. In terms of the DUP, you know, whilst over the years we've had problems, and, you know, every political party has had problems, you know, none of them are perfect over here, definitely not. But it's the whole thing about being accountable, I think. The fact that the DUP, you know, are looking Sinn Féin to be held accountable over the Bobby Story funeral. Yet years ago, Arlene Foster couldn't hold herself accountable to the RHI scandal. And, you know, just various things, you know, over the years that certain politicians haven't held themselves accountable to now, you know, when there is a need, not a need, but like almost a feeling that violence is needed right now, almost in Belfast, because there's so much tension and people just needed something to blame, something to take it out on. And, you know, you can't blame the DUP or Sinn Féin for anything, because none of these people are standing up and telling them to do what they're doing. But it's more about the messages they send out to the people that they represent, in terms of, you're angry about this, talk to us about it and we'll get this fixed through policy. But the fact that neither parties are saying to do this through policy is probably not helping.
That's a fair answer. And I've a second question I might put to you, Dermot. That's kind of a similar topic to what Alana just answered there. As a person who lived through the Troubles, I'm exasperated and angry at the abject intransigence of the DUP and Sinn Féin, where never the twain will meet, and the emasculation of all other parties in between. Is it not now time for you young people, our future, to drive out of Stormont and produce an executive that will work?
That's quite a loaded question. I think the DUP and Sinn Féin are in power because people vote for them. They didn't take the place by storm. They didn't come in, or, you know, they didn't hold everyone in Northern Ireland at gunpoint, you know, but not recently anyway. But they didn't force everybody. They didn't force everybody to vote for them. They were voted in by the people of Northern Ireland. They hold the majority. So I don't think it's really fair to say that it's the job of young people to push them out, because if people want to push them out, vote against them, vote for the other parties, organise, go against them. I'd say my vote will probably go to Sinn Féin. So, and that's probably not what whoever asked the question wants to hear, but it will, because I'm a progressive person and I'm a believer in a United Ireland. Now, they're not perfect. I criticise them probably more than I criticise any other party. So I think, yes, maybe we should be pushing out, you know, the old guard, and maybe we should be moving towards, I suppose, creating a more united community and creating an executive that is properly representative of everybody, and that doesn't just, I suppose, represent nationalism, unionism, and the polarized aspects of it. It has to be not just done through voting out the main parties, but through changing the system more so.
And Naoise, just very quickly on that, is there a way to change the system to make it better without looking too closely at parties? Is there a way to make Stormont work better that you know, while accepting that Sinn Féin and the DUP probably will be the ones working together?
Not too sure what you mean, but maybe if it's social movements, and if that's the case, maybe, or a power outside of Stormont. And I mean, if we look at the recent Aquilia campaign, it was mass mobilisation of, not mass mobilisation, but mobilisation of large sections of the community, 15,000 people in the city centre calling for an Irish Language Act and stuff like that. There are people outside of the doors shouting in does make a difference, and that's just reflective of how things are moving here. I mean, I have to echo what Dermot says. Like, if people don't, the UP and Sinn Féin just didn't storm the capital, they were elected in, and there's a reason for that. People believe in the constituencies, they're doing the job. Whether they are or not, that's up for the debate. I mean, what we've seen last night when we were talking about that, the violence and stuff, there was a protest organised on an interface. Theirs were leadership, theirs were political parties, and these positions need to be calling out. This is what their role is. So where the power lies without Stormont, not too sure. Citizens' assemblies, social movements, stuff like that there. But ultimately, it's up to people that they elected. Yeah,
citizen assemblies have worked pretty well historically, I think. Jay, can I ask you a question about education that we've gotten in? Does integrated education offer an opportunity to people to share more views and opinions and detach from their generally learned viewpoint? What are the benefits of integrated education?
Well, as you were saying earlier, Northern Ireland is a separated place, and people are segregated in a large portion of their lives, and including where they live. So I think any way that you can unite people is a good thing. In integrated education, you're able to bring together those two divided communities in a place where they spend most of their time. They're spending at least 6 hours a day there, 5 days a week. I mean, Pierre when we talk about mental health education in schools, the reason that we thought schools were so important is because young people are in them for so much of their time. So if you can bring communities together through schools, then there's no bad in that.
Yeah, and I suppose that the supports that education are offered to young people, there's a lot that can be done when both communities are in the one area. You don't have as many, I suppose, cross community initiatives when they're all in the one school together. Hafsa, can I ask you this question and message we got in as well? To thank you all so much. The insight, analysis and articulation from all the panelists has been amazing. I'm wondering, do you see a future without walls? And if so, what needs to be built to be able to take them down?
That's a whole question.
It's a big question, all right, yeah.
I know, yeah. Can you break it down, please?
Yeah, so basically the divides that are in Northern Ireland, what can be done, first of all, I suppose, what can be done initially to break down divides? And do you think it can be done quickly or how long it might take?
I don't think this is something that could be done easily. It's constructional, generational thing that has been going on for a long time. And it's definitely not an easy thing to just get over it and just like that. But the thing is, through education, everything can be done, but it'll take a long time. And it could start with, not everything, you could start with our generation, with our younger generation trying to, educate others and, instead of going, because many younger generation, live on what their parents teach, all the segregation, all those, what's dividing the communities. But if we start as one and, try to, push that segregation mindset and, instead of marginalizing others, I think that would be a good, easy way to start, starting with building, communities and youth groups,
Start with the young generation that maybe doesn't have the same coloured perceptions as previous generation as parents. I might throw the final question out to everyone, and whoever wants to jump in can. How does it make you feel to see adults clapping and cheering the 12-year-old rioters? Is it dispiriting for you as the next generation to see that? Dermot, do you want to go first?
I think it's ridiculous. It's scary because it's not my generation who grew up during the Troubles. We didn't grow up with the wounds of guns and, you know, petrol bombs and car bombs. That wasn't my generation. We don't know what that's like, and I wanted to stay that way. So when the generation that did see that grew up through that knew nothing but violence, is essentially cheering on violence, I think that almost shows the appetite of that's, you know, it's not the entire older generation. It's a very small section of the community, but it shows that section of the community not only supports violence, but it seems to show that they want it, because they're cheering it on whenever we all know the legacy it leaves. We all know what it does. It destroys the community, and it's being cheered on. Like that's dangerous, and it's ridiculous, and it cannot in any way be justified. It has to be stopped. I think Naomi Long referred to it as child abuse, and that's what it is. It's grooming children essentially into going out and ratting, and that's dangerous.
Alana?
I 100% agree. Like, as I mentioned at the start, my little sister is 14. To think that, you know, if we lived in a different area, that she could be out there with her friends throwing bombs at the police is terrifying. And, you know, you can't blame it entirely on any one person, because if you think about it, every holiday, like, you know, whether it's St. Patrick's Day, whether it's the 12th of July, a lot of the young people go to it because, you know, oh, it's an excuse to party, not because they actually believe in it. And it's honestly the same thing. You know, these kids are like, oh, it's an excuse to get out in the streets and annoy people, because kids will be kids. But there's a certain point where people do need to intervene, because kids will be kids, yeah, knock on people's doors and run away, but not throw bombs at the police. And it's, you know, it is disgusting to think that, because at 13 and 14, as me and Dermot were joking about, we were sitting playing Minecraft at home. We were now, you know, blowing up buses. And the fact that that's allowed to happen it's terrifying. And the fact that it's being encouraged as well. We did not see the travesties of the Troubles firsthand. Yes, we sat in GCSE history and learnt about it, but we didn't have our schoolmates being shot on their way to school. We didn't have, you know, our work colleagues, you know, being in the way of a bomb on their way to work. We didn't have that, but our parents did. And the fact that people this age are okay with kind of, it feels like they're almost restarting the fire. Like, I was on the phone to my granny last night, and about the bus, she's like, it's like the 70s all over again. You know, she shouldn't be able to say that. It's 2021 and we need to move on.
I think that's a good point to end on, about how your thoughts on the recent news events, and how we shouldn't let Northern Ireland's future be its past. I want to thank all our panelists for that excellent discussion. You've been impressive and articulate. Thank you to everyone who came to watch the discussion and who contributed questions in the chat function. I'd like to thank our producer, Brian, who organised the event, and the editors who oversaw this topic of the Good Information Project, Sinead O'Carroll and Christine Bohan. The video will be available to watch back on YouTube. If you missed some of it, you can keep an eye on that. If you want to give any feedback, you can email myself at grania@thejournal.ie or Brian Whelan at thejournal.ie, or ping us on Twitter either. Thank you for watching, and thanks for taking part.